All right, we've all been there. Family gathering. You're stuck listening to your third cousin Larry or your sister-in-law Sophie going on and on about the news and the politics and all their beliefs, and in fact, they have no idea what they're talking about. So, do you jump in and correct them and risk getting into a big fight, or do you just let it all go, water under the bridge? Well, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania have developed an approach for handling these sometimes annoying or at least frustrating interactions. They call it bypassing misinformation.
So how does it all work? Here to tell us more is Javier Granado Samayoa. He is a research associate at UPenn's Social Action Lab, which did this study. Javier, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So what is the approach that your research, actual research, proves is helpful in these situations?
Right, so we were testing this new approach called bypassing, which tries to combat the effects of misinformation in sort of a less confrontational way. So what you do is, instead of directly contradicting what the person says, you share other true information that shifts their opinion.
Can you give an example in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say you find yourself 4th of July barbecue, and your uncle says something like, "I don't need sunscreen, I don't burn." The typical response would be saying something like, "That's not true, you can get skin damage even if you don't visibly burn." Bypassing tries to go around that and instead say something like, "You know, I found this sunscreen that smells great, keeps my skin looking healthy, and it's good for the environment." Something like that.
What if someone says like, you can leave potato salad out, on the table for hours at that 4th of July party?
Yeah, so the correction would be something like, "That's not true. If you leave food out at room temperature for a while, it can grow bacteria and make people sick." The bypassing approach instead would focus on saying something like, "I prefer to keep the food in the fridge until it's time to serve. I find that the sensation is more pleasant and it keeps it tasting fresh." So you're trying to highlight other positive or negative information that shifts the person in the direction of what you want them.
So it's a way of avoiding having to say you're wrong.
Right, it is less confrontational. And I want to be clear, correction can be effective, but there are situations where people will entrench or dig into their position. And let's be honest, you don't want to be ruining the 4th of July barbecue with your actually,
Yeah.
But isn't there something to be said for being direct and not like, dancing around an issue?
Absolutely. So there are many different tools that you can use to combat misinformation, and there's absolutely a place for correction. But I think there's a lot of value in rounding out our toolbox. And when people are likely to dig in deeper, or it's just going to get you into a fight, you might be able to try this non-confrontational route. And we do find that it can be as effective and sometimes even more effective than correction. So correction really relies on being able to get a lot of information out. If you just have a little bit of time and space, maybe try bypass.
Is the idea that if you contradict someone or try to correct them, that they will dig deeper into their conviction, and that the other approach is better at kind of getting them to start thinking in a different way?
Yeah, so in our research, we find that bypassing leads to less discomfort and less anger relative to a correction. So if I tell you, "No, that's not true," let's be honest, how many people will just say, "Oh, you're right. I completely changed my mind." And there is some level of discomfort that I think is natural, and some people can get past it and others can't.
Are you a director or a bypasser?
I have a lot of humility, assuming that I'm wrong about all this stuff. So if someone's saying something, I'm going to be like, "Well, maybe."
Yeah, oh, that's good.
I hope that works out. I mean, you could be right. I don't know.
Love it. Yes,
could be
that's
the case. Did you have a very bad experience at a 4th of July family function?
I'm actually Canadian, so we do Canada Day. All of my American experiences with 4th of July have been amazing. Yeah.
That's awesome.
But yes, I have gotten into, let's say, heated debates when I correct people, and sometimes it's better to just sort of add additional information that sort of pushes people in the direction that you want them to.
Yeah.
Let them be. All right, Javier, thank you so much.
Yeah, that's great. So is this all an inevitable fact, a reality of the digital age, or can something actually be done to stop it? Here to talk about this and more is Professor Laura Edelson, who teaches computer science at Northeastern University and co-directs the Cybersecurity for Democracy project. Professor, thank you very much for being here. One man's misinformation is another man's good faith argument. I don't know any entity out there who I would trust to sort of regulate fact from fiction when it comes to online conversation. I also want to say up top that a lot of the things that we're highlighting online as problematic, you can have a one-on-one conversation with somebody about. It's just something about that online space that strips away people's humanity. It just seems to get worse. So tell me, is there a solution? Can it get better?
First of all, it's great to be with you today. And I think what's so hard about answering that question is we're not talking about one problem. We're talking about three problems all tangled together. First of all, yes, there are people who say really incredibly enraging things online, but the fact of the matter is that in really enraging stuff, that rage bait, it gets put in front of people because rage bait is also engaging. And engagement is what social media platforms sell, right? This is the business model. They sell engagement, they sell attention. And so we are in this situation where some of the most hateful, the most vile, the most polarizing content is the stuff that performs really well in this algorithmic speech landscape. So I think that's a huge part of the problem here that we can't ignore.
And there were a lot of guardrails that were put on content, especially during the pandemic, to try to stop information that wasn't correct and stop that from spreading. But then there was really a rollback. Some of the bigger companies like X and Meta started to roll things back more recently. Do you think that the way that bad information spread online so quickly after this assassination is a consequence of that rollback?
Absolutely. This was a conscious choice that several platforms made, most notably, obviously, X, but also Meta's platforms, to make a shift from, having things like fact checking, from having measures in place that would allow, hate speech, violence to be deaccelerated by the algorithm, and to have trust and safety teams that would build systems that would, again, de-amplify polarizing content. They made a conscious choice to move away from that. This was a business decision that they made, and this is the result.
But Professor, how could you really trust a social media company to police things like hate speech or misinformation when it's really hard, actually, to make these determinations? I mean, there's an op-ed in the Times today from a conservative college student writing about how the left views speech as violence, and he makes good faith arguments that align with his worldview and his faith, and they call him a xenophobe. They say he hates LGBTQ people. So this is what I mean by, like, one person's hate speech or speech is violence is another person's like, no, actually, this is just where I come from and what's in my heart, and I don't mean anyone harm, it's just my argument.
Right. And I think this is where we kind of need to disentangle the content from the platform design, because you have to remember, you are not seeing this on every platform. And this isn't because people don't post an incredibly diverse range of views to every platform, from X to Reddit to Pinterest. But there is a reason that what is in your feed on X is very different than what is on your feed on Pinterest. And it's not because people aren't posting, again, the same range of stuff on both of those platforms, but those platforms choose to amplify different things. And so X really prioritizes engagement. So they will put in front of you, a lot of things that some of which you will violently agree with and some of which will make you violently angry. That's the algorithm design. That is how it is built. Instagram has a slightly different design, but it is similarly an engagement-focused algorithm. But not every platform is like this. And this isn't about what speech people are putting out in the world. It's about what the different algorithms choose to amplify. And to be really clear, platform designers have the absolute right to make those choices. And I'm not saying that if someone like Elon Musk wants to make a platform that amplifies the most extreme, most polarizing voices, that he doesn't have an absolute right to do that. What I'm saying is that what you are seeing on platforms is, yes, it is a result of the speech people put out in the world, but it's also a result of the speech, the algorithm that those platform designers, choose to make, what those algorithms choose to amplify.
Yeah. Professor, I think that's a good point. It's a reminder. There used to be an old saying in the news business in the 80s and 90s, if it bleeds, it leads. And now there's like an algorithm version when it comes to conflict and things that are emotionally powerful but not necessarily accurate. It drives engagement. We're wired to follow it. So thank you for kicking off this discussion with us. We really appreciate it, Professor.
Happy to be with you. Thanks.
Scrolling through social media can be like navigating a minefield of misinformation on everything from politics to health, you name it. And that is hard enough as it is, but when it comes to parenting advice, who can you trust? The New York Times bestselling author of Crib Sheet Emily Oster is who we're going to talk to about all this. She's also the founder and CEO of Parent Data and has important tips on how to sort out the good advice from the bad. Emily, good morning. It's so good to see you. I love scrolling through videos. But the thing is, just because something is slickly produced and has great captions does not mean that you can rely on it for useful and truthful information online.
Yeah, so I think misinformation has a few problems for parents. One is that we know that false information gets amplified more than true information. So you're seeing a lot of false information. And then people are getting that information when they're not ready to process it. So it's coming right at them rather than them seeking it out. And that's not serving our critical thinking. And then also, a lot of the false information looks like the good information. It looks like this person's a real expert when actually the studies that they're talking about are not good, are made up, are in many ways flawed.
Well, that can be really dangerous, especially when it comes to health information for kids.
It can, and I think one of the things is parents are constantly being served, here's a simple solution for a complex problem. If only you gave your kid this one supplement, their ADHD would be solved. And that causes parents to both think they're doing things wrong and also potentially to not seek out good information to solve the actual problems that they're having.
Yeah, it can be dangerous for the kids, but as you point out, it's dangerous for the parents because they think they're screwing up. And everything you're doing as a parent is high stakes and high pressure. You want to get it done and urgently. And you feel terrible when it doesn't work. So my household's been a big fan of yours since your very first book because you go to the actual research as best we can tell something and lay out an answer. People should look up all of your work. But on the fly, when you're on social media and you see something, what are some red flags to look for about that should make you think twice?
So I think one thing is to look for credentials. That doesn't always help, but some people, if somebody's the head of the AAP, they have more credentials than someone who doesn't have any of those qualifications. I think the second thing is that people should be looking for, is this person offering something where if I give them money, there's an easy solution to a hard problem? That's not usually the way that solutions work. That's not how an expert's gonna pitch to you. Comment for my supplement brand so you can solve all your problems. That's probably misinformation. I think that's a pretty good tip for a lot of people in processing some of this online information.
We were talking about the dangers of this when it comes to health. I mean, we're seeing vaccine skepticism at the highest levels at this point. What resources can parents trust out there?
So I hope that they trust me. So I have a website called Parent Data, which looks at this. But I think also things like the American Academy of Pediatrics has been really effective, particularly around vaccines, in coming out and saying, here's actually what you need to know. Here's the good information about this. And I think it is particularly hard when at the highest levels we're seeing this kind of really misinformation coming out to parents.
And the reality is on a lot of tough questions of what to do as a parent, the answer is the research is a little inconclusive and it may depend on your particular kid.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is also going to be dependent on your preferences. Even the best data is not usually bossy. Usually you can look at the data, understand what it says, and then make a decision that's consistent with the values that your family has. And I think that putting those together is important, but you do need the best data. You're not going to make good decisions if the data you have is wrong.
Why is it, do you think, that people fall so easily into these traps with these online influencers?
I think there's a clickbaitness where when we see something that makes us panic, we panic, and then we want to react to it immediately. And we all want to do exactly the right thing for our kids. And I think that's fundamentally, this comes from such a good place of wanting to be the best parent. Yeah. And parenting is hard, and we're looking for the solution. If the solution says it's easy, I want to dive into that.
Yeah, especially when there's some nice music in the background.
When there's beautiful music and the person's kitchen is very clean, it's like they must know something I don't. What is it that they know?
I've given up being the best parent. I want to be perfectly fine.
Second best parenting.
Fine. Yeah, that's good.
Third best is A-OK too. Emily Oster, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.